Mrs. Baskin looked at him thoughtfully. What does your father say about all this? He says I should leave it alone. Sometimes, Andy, said Mrs. Baskin, her voice hushed, it takes a long, long time for people to show their grief. Do you think it's possible that only now you're feeling the loss of someone who loved you very much, whom you loved? Andy showed his disgust with silence. Let me tell you something about people who are upset, she continued. When they hide from what's hurting them, from reality, it only makes them more upset. Face reality and things become clear. Now, I'd like to talk about this again next week, when you've had time to think about that. Andy pulled himself forward in his chair. I'd like to know something, he said. Certainly. Do you think I made up the call? That I'm hiding from, what did you say, reality? My honest answer is, I don't know, she said, smiling. Now we can meet again Monday, 8th period. I've checked your schedule. You've got a study hall then. Let's make it a whole period. Do I have a choice? Asked Andy. Mrs. Baskin smiled again. I think not, she said. Andy stood in the hallway outside Mrs. Baskin's office, furious at both her and Dorfman. You okay? Andy looked up. It was Sally. She was wearing a coat that was much too big for her. Andy made a motion toward Mrs. Baskin's office door. Remember that call I got? That weirdo I told you about? She nodded yes. They think I made it up. You're kidding. Because a year ago my mother got killed. I don't get it, said Sally. Neither do I, but now she wants to see me every week. Will you? Andy shrugged. I don't know. There's a bunch of people going over to McDonald's. It's Sue's birthday. Want to come? I'm in no mood. Come on, she said, taking him by the arm. It'll make you feel better. When they got to the restaurant, 10 kids were already there. One of them had arranged a McDonald's party for Sue, who was just 16, a party complete with balloons, party favors, and someone dressed up like Ronald McDonald. Andy tried to enjoy the fooling around, but couldn't get into it. He kept thinking about Mrs. Baskin's story, about the boy who cried wolf. As he saw it, his situation was just the opposite. He was crying, but about a real wolf. It was other people who were refusing to believe the truth. Nina Clemmer, she needed to be warned. Her life was in danger, but he was the only one willing to take that fact seriously. At dinner that evening, Andy told his father about Mrs. Baskin. How did she find out about the call? He wanted to know. Surprised by the question, Andy tried to duck it with a shrug. You tell people at school? His father pressed. I guess. I warned you. People grab onto what they hear, especially if there's some mystery involved. It's just wrong, Andy said, pushing his plate away. What are you going to do? His father inquired. Set the world right by yourself? Go and see Mrs. Baskin a couple of times. It won't hurt. Want me to call her? No, Andy said, worried what his father might say if he learned he'd gone to the police. Dr. Zadinsky sighed. It'll blow over. He studied Andy carefully. Are you upset about it? Being a year ago? Or the move? Would you like me to cancel my date? What date? Tomorrow, with Peggy. I don't want to talk about it, said Andy, wishing people would stick to the point. Where are you going with her? You suggested it, his father replied with a smile. The lobster place. You driving to where she lives, picking her up, paying for dinner? The whole 50s bit? The color drained from Dr. Zadinsky's face. What's the matter? I forgot to work that out, his father said. He got up and headed for the bedroom phone. She probably didn't bring that up on purpose, Andy called after him. His father came back with a sly smile. Think so? Sure, she likes you. Andy finished eating and cleaning up, then stole a look into his father's room. He was on his bed, shoes kicked off, tie loosened, sitting propped up against a pillow. After 45 minutes of talking, the phone was still stuck to his ear. Andy could see he was having a good time. I'm going for a walk, Andy let him know. Dr. Zadinsky waved in response. Hands in pockets, Andy started walking with no particular direction in mind, but before he realized it, he was halfway to the college. By day, the campus of Madison State was like a park with carefully groomed lawns and trees. By night, the greens turned dark, and the empty classroom buildings became ghostly hulks. Walkway lamps cast feeble pools of light, and people moved with hurried steps. Yet the campus was open. No fence or guards blocked entry. People could and did enter at will. Andy had done so countless times, meeting his father or coming to watch a sporting event. That night the stars were out. The air was soft and balmy. Couples sat on lawns. From an open dorm window, music pulsed. Except for the library, whose lights blazed, the main buildings lay in shadow. Andy headed there. Knowing that Nina had no idea what he looked like, Andy openly searched the building's 3 doors before getting the nerve to go to the magazine section where he had seen her before. "Is Nina Clemmer around?" he asked. "She just left." "Nowhere?" "The student, a girl," considered Andy. "You her friend?" "Yeah. Probably went to her dorm. Or the student center." Andy didn't see her at first. He checked the eating area. It was served by a snack bar and was built on a lower level than the 2-story, tree-filled atrium. Though it had many tables and eating booths, Andy could survey the entire space from the top of the steps. He spotted her sitting alone in a back booth, sipping a can of soda and reading an open notebook. She was dressed in a black jumpsuit, a white sash around her waist, and another white band over her hair. Her lipstick was purple, her dangling plastic earrings blue. Andy walked toward her but stopped a few feet away, hoping she would look up. She remained intent on her reading. He moved closer to her booth, but she still didn't notice. "Nina?" he said. Nina jerked her head up. Can I talk to you?" Puzzled, Nina stared at him. "What?" she said. "I need to talk to you." "What about?" "It's important." "Who are you?" she asked. "Andy. Andy Zadinsky," he said, slipping into the opposite booth bench. When he sat, Nina stiffened, ready to bolt. "What do you want?" she said. "Look," said Andy. "Last week, Friday, at my home, this guy called me. Said his name was Zeke. I mean, I don't know who he is, and he—" Andy stopped when Nina flipped her notebook shut. "See," he went on, "this guy started to talk about you." "Me?" "Right. Described you. Exactly. The way you are." Nina cocked her head. "This for real?" "Honest. It's what happened." Nina considered Andy carefully, then suddenly stood up. "I'm not interested." Andy impulsively grabbed her wrist to keep her from leaving. "He said he killed you." Nina freed herself with a yank of her arm, then stopped, open-mouthed, staring at Andy, her face paler than before. She rubbed the place where he had held her. It was a little red. "He said what?" she whispered. Andy dropped his voice. "That he killed you." "Are you out of your mind?" Nina said, looking around to see if anyone else was near. Andy rushed on. "See, there was this friend of mine with me, Paul. I told him to get the police and trace the call while I talked to Zeke. But they couldn't. You can't do that easily except on TV. Then, I called the police to tell them. Even went to the station. But they said, forget it. It was a gag, a joke. See?" "He said he was going to kill me?" Nina repeated. "No, he said he had killed you. And he described you, too. The way you look and dress, that you're, good looking, everything. But who?" "Right. That's the whole point. He said his name was Zeke. But I don't know. I mean, I told the whole thing to the police so they could warn you. But they didn't, did they?" Nina shook her head. "That's what I was afraid of," said Andy. "I thought you should know." "Monday," Nina suddenly said. "Monday afternoon. Did you call me?" "I wanted to tell you—" "And a little later, page me in the library?" "So I could see if you fit Zeke's description." "Look, kid, I don't know who you are or what you want, but you a student here?" "I got high school in—" Nina cut him off. "You've got no right to do this to me or even be here. I mean, you better clear out or I'll—" "No, look!" tried Andy. Nina wouldn't let him speak. "Zeke or Andy or whatever your name is, so help me, I'm going to report this. And if you ever bother me again—" She didn't finish but hurried away, almost running out of the area. People twisted in their seats to look at her, then at Andy. Andy was stunned. When he arrived home, his father was in the living room reading. "I was getting worried," he said, putting the book aside. "Where you been?" Andy didn't know how to start. He sat down and looked at his hands. "Andy," his father asked, "what's the matter?" "Wait a minute, I'll tell you." Andy pressed his hands together tightly to control his nervousness, but still couldn't make himself look up. Finally he said, "I don't understand this. I don't." "What are you talking about?" "That call," Andy explained. "Zeke saying he was going to had killed her. Zeke, that call, last Friday." His father made the connection. "What's happened now?" Andy forced himself to look up. "When I went to the police—" "Police?" his father cut in. "When did you go to them? And why?" "2 days ago, to tell them that there really is a Nina Clemmer. Then Zeke is watching her. That she is in danger." Only the cop I spoke to didn't believe me. All he did was call Mrs. Baskin, the counselor at my school. You told me the cop thought it was me trying to get attention from this Nina. Andy, Dad, she needs to know. From what Mrs. Baskin said, I know they won't tell her. So just now I went over to the college to find her myself. And in the student center, I tried to talk to her. That's all. What happened? She got it all wrong. Thought I was pestering her. Said she was going to report me to the police. Andy looked directly at his father. Why doesn't anybody believe me? That it? Yeah. No more? Andy shook his head. You give her your name? His father asked. Sure. Dr. Zadinsky sighed. Andy, the college is very concerned about harassment. Kids call in bomb threats during exam periods. Lots of false alarms. Women have been assaulted, mugged. That's got nothing to do with me, Andy said. For a while, neither of them spoke. Then Dr. Zadinsky drew himself up. Okay, he said. I'm going to ask you something, and you must give me an absolutely truthful answer. No matter what you say, I'm going to defend you. But understand, I must know the truth. A deal? I don't know what you're talking about. Am I going to get a straight answer? All right, yes. What is it? That call, his father began, the one you said you got. Andy, look up at me, right into my eyes. Did you, maybe with Paul's help, make up the whole thing? Are you serious? Andy cried. Give me an answer, his father insisted. It was real, Andy snapped back. Dr. Zadinsky scrutinized his son for a long time. Then he said, Okay, thanks a bunch. After a moment, his father began to pace the room. Andy watched. You work out your date? He asked. My what? Your date. Tomorrow. Peggy. Oh, yes, fine. The place you suggested. Great. I'd better call it off. Why? I'm not sure if tomorrow's a good time for me to be out. What's that got to do with it? Andy asked. I should be around if something happens. What could happen? His father spun around. Did you even think of the consequences? What if this girl does file charges? Andy winced. No, first in the morning, we better call the policeman you spoke to. Head him off. And Mrs. Baskin. No, let's go to your school first. Together. We'll see her, show her I'm behind you, and get her on your side. Things might go easier. Andy felt both grateful and embarrassed. You don't have to call off your date, he said, sorry he had made problems for his father. Let's see what happens, Dr. Zadinsky replied. At 8 o'clock the next morning, Andy and his father walked through the school building toward Mrs. Baskin's office. The halls were already crowded with students, and as they turned down the last hall, Andy saw Paul. Andy reached out to pull his father another way, but it was too late. Paul had seen them. Hi, he said, coming up to them. How you doing, Dr. Z? What's happening? He looked from Andy to Dr. Zadinsky. Hello, Paul, said Dr. Zadinsky. I'm just meeting with one of the math teachers here. How you been? Fine, I gotta go. Nice to see you. He gave Andy a wink. Catch you later, he said, and rushed off. Dr. Zadinsky turned toward Andy. See, not everyone need know. But Andy was sure Paul had seen through his father's lie. When they reached Mr. Baskin's office, they found Officer Dorfman waiting outside the door. Andy's heart sank. Hello, Andrew, Dorfman said. This your father? He extended a hand to Dr. Zadinsky. Pleased to meet you, sir. Officer Tim Dorfman, Madison Police Department. Dr. Robert Zadinsky, Andy's father returned. Andy had rarely heard him use his title. Did Mrs. Baskin call you in? Dorfman asked. Not at all, Andy's father said. This was Andy's idea. He wanted to call you, too. As he spoke, he glanced at Andy as if to say, I know it's not true, but let me do the talking. Did you? Said Dorfman, looking at Andy with a slight smile. Good idea. Andy was sure Dorfman didn't believe his father, and he wished they could get out of the hall where students kept passing and gawking. They waited in awkward silence. When Mrs. Baskin finally stepped out of her office, she was surprised to find the Zadinskys there, but quickly recovered. Dr. Zadinsky, she said, I'm glad to see you. This was Andy's idea, he told her. Andy looked away. Something happened last night that we thought would be best to discuss with you. I'm all for that, Dorfman put in. Mrs. Baskin looked from Dorfman to Andy's father. She said, I think we better go into my office. She sat behind her desk, Dorfman on the right and Andy and his father to the left.